It started like any other routine flight. Passengers were boarding, settling into their seats, stowing away their carry-ons. But within minutes, the calm atmosphere turned tense. A young black man, quiet and respectful, was asked to step off. The plane. No clear explanation, no warning. Just a group of police officers waiting at the front, eyes fixed on him, voices firm. Confused and visibly shaken, he asked, "Why?" But no one gave him a straight answer. Cameras started rolling, whispers turned into gasps, and passengers watched in disbelief as the officers grabbed his arms and began pulling him down the narrow aisle. The energy shifted quickly. Some passengers looked away, afraid to speak up. Others pulled out their phones, capturing every moment. The man didn't fight back. He didn't raise his voice. But there was something about the way he looked at the officers, calm, steady, unafraid, that said he knew something they didn't. As they reached the exit of the plane, one officer muttered something under his breath, loud enough to be caught on camera. The words didn't sit right. It wasn't just an escort. It felt personal. It felt targeted. Just as they stepped onto the jet bridge, the man finally spoke. What he revealed in that moment made the officers freeze. Their grip loosened. Their expressions shifted from control to confusion, and then panic. The tension was thick. You could hear a pin drop. No one expected it, especially not the ones wearing the badges. What could this man possibly have said that made trained officers suddenly question everything they were doing? Why was he targeted in the first place? And most importantly, who was he? This isn't just a story about being dragged off a plane. It's about identity, power, and what happens when the people in control realize they may have made a very big mistake. What comes next will change the way you see the whole situation. The officers stood frozen, still holding his arms, but not pulling anymore. The man looked each of them in the eyes and calmly repeated the words that had made them. "Stop. Call your supervisor. Now." His voice wasn't loud, but it had weight. Something about it made them hesitate. One of them reached for his radio. The others exchanged quick glances, trying to decide what to do. It was clear. They weren't expecting this. Passengers near. The front of the plane had followed them into the jet bridge, keeping a distance but still recording. The mood was heavy, thick with confusion. Some people were whispering, asking if anyone knew what was going on. A few were brave enough to ask. The flight attendants, but they only shrugged, clearly unsure themselves. The man, still calm despite everything, stood straight, as if this wasn't the first time he'd been in a situation like this. So, who was he? And why were the police so quick to act? Here's what we know. His name is Marcus Taylor. He booked a first-class seat under his own name. No red flags, no disturbances. He was dressed sharp, pressed shirt, clean shoes, and carried a leather briefcase. From the outside, he looked like any other professional traveler. But someone on board had reported him for suspicious behavior. That's all it took. One vague claim. No proof. And just like that, officers were sent to remove him. But Marcus wasn't just anyone. And that's the part the officers didn't know, at least not at first. While they were trying to decide what to do next, passengers kept recording. And Marcus didn't try to stop them. In fact, he welcomed it. His confidence wasn't forced. It came from knowing something deeper. Something that would make this entire situation backfire if the truth came out. The officers began to sense it too. One of them stepped aside, whispering into his radio again. The tension grew. Who had they just put their hands on? And more importantly, what would happen if the world found out? What Marcus says next will change everything. But for now, the officers have a choice to make, and time is running out. As Marcus stood calmly in the jet bridge, the atmosphere thick with unease, a small crowd began to gather. Some passengers whispered among themselves, others kept recording. unsure whether they were witnessing a misunderstanding or something much more serious. The lead officer, clearly growing uncomfortable, asked again, "What's your business on this flight?" Marcus didn't flinch. "Why don't you ask the name on the ticket? Or better yet, run it through your system." His tone wasn't aggressive, it was matter of fact, like he was giving them a chance to step back before things went further. Back. On the plane, a flight attendant leaned over to whisper to another, her eyes darting toward the cockpit. "I think this is going too far," she said quietly. But neither wanted to speak up too loudly. No one wanted to be the one to challenge authority, not yet. Still, the unease was spreading. It wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about how quickly everything escalated and how no one had stopped to ask the basic questions. Meanwhile, the original complaint, the so-called suspicious behavior, came from a man seated a few rows behind Marcus. He hadn't seen Marcus do anything specific. He just had a feeling. That man was now keeping his head low, nervously glancing at the cameras around him. He hadn't expected this much attention, and he definitely hadn't expected Marcus to stand his ground so calmly. One of the younger officers, clearly uneasy, pulled the lead officer aside. "What if he's someone important?" he asked under his breath. "He's asking for a supervisor and we don't even have a charge." The lead officer didn't answer right away. He was sweating now. The pieces weren't adding up. Why had they been sent in so quickly? Who made the call? And then came another twist. Marcus slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim ID wallet. With steady hands, he flipped it open. The nearest officer took one glance, then blinked hard, stepping back as if he'd just touched something hot. He looked over at his partner, then at the camera phone still filming. No one said a word. But everyone knew this wasn't just about a plane seat anymore. And the truth behind that ID? That was something nobody was ready for yet. The officer's eyes stayed locked on the ID, his expression shifting from doubt to disbelief. He didn't say anything, but his body language said it all. He recognized the name. Marcus didn't move, didn't flinch. He just waited, watching their reactions. The lead officer stepped forward to take a closer look, and that's when the tension hit its peak. A nervous hush fell over the small crowd that had formed. Even the passengers filming seemed to hold their breath, their phones trembling slightly in their hands. Inside the plane, the captain had been alerted. He stepped out of the cockpit, his face tight, trying to assess the situation. "What's going on here?" he asked sharply. No one answered right away. The officers were now clearly rattled. Whatever was on that ID had changed everything. But they were in too deep to back out easily. Cameras were rolling, people were watching, and whatever decision they made next was going to have consequences. Marcus finally broke the silence. "I suggest you make a few calls before this gets worse than it already is." His voice stayed calm, but there was an edge to it now. The kind that made even those who didn't know him feel the weight of his words. The officer holding the ID gave a subtle nod, stepping away to make a call. Another officer, now visibly anxious, tried to keep the crowd back. "Please return to your seats," he said, but no one moved. Everyone sensed this was bigger than they thought. Meanwhile, the passenger who made the original report tried to quietly slip out of his seat. He moved fast, hoping to disappear into the crowd before anyone noticed. But he didn't make it far. Another passenger, still recording, cut him off. "Where are you going?" she asked sharply. "You started this." He froze, realizing he was now part of the story, no longer just a whisper in the background. Back on the jet bridge, the officer with the phone looked up from his call, face pale. He slowly turned to Marcus and nodded. "They said to stand down. Let him go." But it wasn't over. Not even close. Marcus stepped forward, calmly pocketing his ID. And just before walking back onto the plane, he said one thing, low enough that only the nearest officer heard it. Whatever he said, It made the officer's eyes widen, and in that moment, it became clear. The real story was just beginning. Marcus stepped back onto the plane, eyes straight ahead, briefcase in hand, not saying a word. The passengers parted as he walked past, a mix of shock, respect, and curiosity painted across their faces. Phones were still up, still recording, but quieter now, like everyone knew something serious had just happened, even if they didn't fully understand what. The officers stayed behind in the jet bridge, whispering, one of them visibly shaken by whatever Marcus had said. But just as the cabin started to settle and Marcus returned to his seat, something unexpected happened. Flight attendant came down the aisle, phone in hand, whispering to the captain who had returned to the front. Their expressions shifted quickly, concern, then confusion, and then something close to panic. The captain turned to the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize, but we're going to need a few more moments before departure," he said, trying to sound calm. But his voice cracked slightly at the end. Something was off. Again. Marcus noticed too. He looked up, alert. Then the same officer who had made the call earlier appeared at the cabin door. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood two men in plain clothes, both with federal credentials around their necks. They didn't say who they were. They didn't have to. The mood shifted instantly. The tension that had started to fade snapped back like a rubber band. This wasn't just about race or mistaken identity or even authority anymore. This had layers, government-level layers. One of the agents made eye contact with Marcus. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't friendly either. He nodded slightly and said, "Mr. Taylor, we'll need a moment of your time. Off the plane." Murmurs rippled through the cabin again. Marcus sighed, slowly stood, and turned to the passengers who had stood by him. "Keep recording," he said quietly, not to provoke, but to protect. Then he turned to follow the agents. As he stepped off the plane again, a voice from a nearby seat whispered, "Who is this guy?" But no one had the answer yet. Outside the cabin, the agents didn't ask questions. They started giving instructions. One pulled out a folder, flipping it open to reveal something sealed and stamped. The officer who had stepped aside earlier tried to peek but was quickly waved back. The tone was serious now, urgent. Marcus didn't resist. But the look on his face said everything. This wasn't unexpected, and just when it seemed like the tension couldn't rise any higher, the second twist landed. Back inside the plane, the passenger who had made the original report, he was gone, vanished, his seat empty, his bag still there. A woman nearby turned to a flight attendant. "Wait, where did that guy go?" The attendant looked confused. He never left, he was just here. But now, no one could find him. Marcus was no longer the only mystery on that plane. Marcus stood face to face with the two federal agents just outside the gate. The air was thick with tension, but his calm never cracked. One of the agents handed him the sealed folder without saying a word. Marcus opened it slowly, glanced at the contents, and nodded. Whatever was in there confirmed what he already knew. The officer who had originally grabbed him tried to lean in again, hoping to catch a glimpse, but the other agent raised a hand and blocked him without breaking eye contact. "This no longer concerns local enforcement," he said flatly. "You're dismissed." Back inside the plane, the cabin buzzed with low conversations. Everyone was asking the same question. What just happened? And more importantly, where was the man who started it all? A quick scan of the passenger list confirmed it. The man who filed the report under a fake name had boarded the plane with a ticket paid in cash, no ID check. He wasn't in the system anymore. It was like he'd disappeared. As Marcus followed, the agents down a quiet hallway, one of them finally spoke. "You were right," he said. "The guy who reported you, he's not just some random passenger. He's tied to an active federal investigation, Surveillance flagged his face at the airport 2 hours ago. We thought we lost him. Marcus didn't look surprised. I told you I was being followed, he replied. But no one listened. Turns out, Marcus wasn't just a regular traveler. He was a key witness in a high-level case involving corruption and internal leaks. The ID he showed wasn't just any government badge. It was from a special division under the Department of Justice, assigned to protect whistleblowers. That's why he stayed calm. That's why he kept telling them to check their system. But here's where the final twist hits. Just as they reached the security office, one of the agents received a call. His face went pale. He turned to Marcus and said, "He's not alone. Airport security just found a second device planted near the baggage area. Same guy's prints. We think this flight was the distraction." Marcus didn't respond right away. Then he said quietly, "That's why I bought that ticket. I knew something was off. I wasn't here to fly. I was here to watch." The agents exchanged a glance, and in that moment, everyone finally realized Marcus Taylor hadn't just been targeted. He had been the one watching all along. Marcus stayed behind with the agents as the investigation widened across the terminal. The missing passenger, now identified as a known operative tied to a larger network, was spotted on surveillance slipping out a side exit minutes before the confrontation on the plane. It was clear he had used Marcus as a distraction, hoping to sneak through unnoticed. But he hadn't counted on Marcus already being one step ahead. The planted device near the baggage claim was disarmed safely, and the airport was swept thoroughly by federal teams. Back on the plane, the captain finally addressed the passengers, offering a vague explanation about a security concern and thanking everyone for their patience. But by now, most of them knew there was more to the story. The footage they'd captured would soon circulate online, and the mystery surrounding Marcus Taylor would spark headlines. Whistleblower mistaken for suspect, black man detained, uncovers bigger threat, and plane panic leads to major airport security break. The officers who had detained Marcus quietly exited the scene, their earlier confidence gone. What started as an incident rooted in bias and assumption had turned into a federal-level security breach, and Marcus had been the only one who saw it coming. In the end, it wasn't just about profiling or race or misuse of authority. It was about listening, about how quickly judgment can cloud truth, about how dangerous it can be when people in power act without understanding the full picture. As Marcus left the airport through a secure exit, one of the agents turned to him and said, "You handled that better than most of us would have." Marcus gave a small, tired smile. You get used to being underestimated. And just like that, he disappeared into the crowd, calm, quiet, and always watching.